What's up, everybody, and welcome back to Fireside Giants. I'm your host, Anthony Rivardo, joined by my co-host, Alex Wilson. And the New York Giants are getting closer and closer to the 2023 NFL Draft, but they still have some massive holes to fill on both the offensive and defensive side of the ball. We're going to go ahead today and discuss their top 3 weaknesses entering the upcoming 2023 NFL Draft, discuss some of the players that the Giants might want to target to kind of fix some of these positions in the draft, and why we think that they should be prioritizing these 3 positions before anything else once they finally enter the draft. So we're going to go ahead and dive into all that, but before we do, make sure to leave a like if you do enjoy this episode. Leave a 5-star review if you're listening on Apple, Spotify, or wherever. Subscribe to the channel if you're new. Ring the bell so you don't miss an episode, and comment your thoughts down below. But without further ado, Alex, how are you doing today, my friend? And what are your thoughts on the Giants' biggest needs entering the draft?
I could not be better, man. It's getting warm in New York City. Things are looking up. When your nose gets congested in New York City, you know it's springtime. So I'm excited about it. It's going to be a fun offseason, my friends. We got the draft quickly approaching, and things are getting interesting for the Giants. We want to take a look at some of the weaker spots. That way we can determine where they need to be allocating resources. We know they spent a lot of money this offseason on retaining Daniel Jones, Saquon Barkley. They got Bobby Okereke, who, by the way, I spoke to and wants to come on the podcast during OTAs. So we'll have Bobby Okereke. And I'm also in contact with Isaiah Hodgins guys now, so hopefully we'll get something on the books soon enough for those guys, and should be really fun to kind of get to know them and what they're going to bring to this team in 2023. But yes, there's a couple of weaknesses we want to discuss, and ultimately the Giants have plenty of draft capital to address them. Now, of course, rookies can take time to develop. It can take time to make positive contributions, but at the end of the day, that's what the Giants need to do to continue building the foundation of this squad, building the foundation of this team, and taking the necessary steps to be a competitive team long term, because investing money, spending too much, is ultimately a problem. It's problematic. We've seen our managers in the past do the same thing. Dave Gettleman spent an egregious amount of money on players, and it never warranted anything. It never, accumulated to wins. It always just set us back. We had to basically spend last year. We made a playoff game trying to just offload money, and that's pretty impressive. The coaching staff was so good. They managed to fuel us to a playoff game, and of course, some good performances from some talented players there and some young guys at that. But I'm excited to kind of take a look at the first position here that needs an upgrade, could use some draft capital. Anthony, why don't you take us away?
Yeah, so in my opinion, the number one need for the New York Giants entering this draft. Now, not saying this is the position that they have to address in the first round. I don't think there's any position that they have to address. All 3 of these positions, though, in my opinion, do need to be addressed within the first 3 rounds. But number one need for the Giants is the center position. Just looking at what the Giants have at that position right now, they don't have much. They have a couple of players who might be able to compete for the starting role, but you don't necessarily want to see any of these guys starting 17 games for the Giants this upcoming season at the center spot. Ben Bredeson, I think that he's the projected starter right now at left guard, but he's the only center on this team, the only player on this team with real valuable starting time at the center position. Now, I know that they just signed J.C. Hassenauer. We discussed him on the channel a couple of days ago, Alex. We both like him as a depth piece. Don't want to see him starting 17 games for the Giants this year. And then the third player that we could mention as a potential starter at the center spot for the Giants is Shane Lemieux. And Alex, we both are very low on Shane Lemieux. I think most listeners of this show know we're not fans of his. We don't think that he should be starting for the Giants this upcoming season. In fact, we've mentioned him multiple times as a potential cap casualty as the Giants kind of prepare to get enough cap space in order to sign their entire draft class. I think that Shane Lemieux could be a player that gets released before the draft. So when you're taking a look at those 3 players, you have Hassenauer, you have Bredeson, you have Lemieux. I think that Bredeson ends up being the starter at left guard, so that kind of just leaves you with 2 rotational backups at the center spot. Without a doubt, the Giants need to add some more talent to this position. Now, if they go into the 2023 NFL Draft, they take a center in the first round, that would be exciting, but it's not that likely. Centers don't usually go in round 1. There's really one prospect who gets mocked in the first round, and he doesn't always get mocked in the first round, and that's John Michael Schmitz out of Minnesota. We've talked about him on the channel as well. Really like his ability to start day 1 and be a long-term solution for the Giants. However, taking a center with the 25th overall pick, some might consider that to be too rich. Now, you take a look at some of these second, third round prospects. Luke Weipler, I just discussed him on the channel, and of course Joel Tippmann, we've also discussed him. These are all really, really good players, but their draft projection ranges anywhere from the first round to the 3rd round. So the Giants might not have to press the need, might not have to press the issue too early and take a center in the first round. However, it really is the biggest need when you look at all of the positions on the Giants roster, at least with some of these other positions that we're going to discuss. They have at least some camp bodies, some veterans out there who can compete and start 17 games if they they need to. They just won't be good. But right now, the Giants don't even have someone that we can confidently say has the ability to start 17 games. They don't have anyone on their roster who has done that, started 17 games at the center position. Not even Ben Bredesen, who's right now the best option for that spot because he has the most starting experience there. He hasn't started a full season there. J.C. Hassenauer has 7 total starts in his career, and Shane Lemieux spent the majority of his time in the NFL at left guard, played a little bit of center in training camp before getting injured and missing the season. So the Giants don't have anybody at center. Again, if you're one of those fans that thinks that the Giants need to go with a center in round 1, I can't even debate that with you necessarily. I might just have to say, okay, I kind of see where you're coming from. It's probably not where I go. I probably go with one of these other 2 positions we're going to discuss. But when you look at that spot, Alex, there's just no talent there. The Giants have to add talent between now and the start of the regular season. I assume you agree with me?
I mean, look, the Giants center's been kind of this weird spot where Nick Gates locked it down. We were confident in Nick Gates. He ended up taking a 3-year deal with the Commanders coming off the broken leg. But somebody said Shane Lemieux in the comments yesterday. Do I have any faith in Shane Lemieux to play center? I don't even have faith in him to play left guard where he's supposed to be playing, let alone transitioning to a new position. For God's sakes, no, please God. You know, they got J.C. Hassenauer they brought in a couple days ago, but again, he's more of a depth piece. We need a starter. And a lot of people will say first round, you know, John Michael Schmitz, you look at, you know, you talked about Weipler, Joe Tittman, there's some really good talent in this draft class. In the second round, there's a ton of starting level centers. And, you know, Tyler Linderbaum, yes, he goes first round last year. He's an exception. He's an excellent, like above the line player. And, you know, coming out of Iowa, I believe, you know, he was a ridiculous talent. The Giants, this draft class at center is really, really deep. And they can find one in the second round, no problem. Not every team needs a center. There's a couple of good free agents on the board right now, and nobody's even picking them up yet. So you can see that a lot of teams don't necessarily look at that as a premier position. The Giants got a ridiculous amount of value from John Feliciano last year, guys. I mean, toward the end of the year, John Feliciano went like 5 or 6 games without giving up a sack, and he was doing really, really well until the playoffs rolled around. I mean, the first playoff game looked really good against the Vikings, and then had a really bad one, as everybody did, against the Eagles and their dominant pass rush. So, you know, is John Feliciano a great player? Absolutely not. Is he a serviceable player? Barely. Nick Gates, you know, obviously got a pretty nice payday. I'm really happy for him. So he goes on to a new team. But the Giants need a legitimate long-term starter, and they need a young one. They need someone who's going to cost a fraction of what anyone else would cost in terms of an above-average starter, or at least potential to be. If you get someone in the second round, you got 4 years of basically cheap-ass center play from a player with a lot of upside, a lot of talent, and the Giants in a really deep center draft class can find one of those guys, no problem, and then coach them up to be a really good player, or at least we hope to be a really good player, and solve that spot for at least the next 4 years. I think that's the right way to go about this. I don't think spending a first-round pick is the right thing to do at center. I don't think the Giants are going to do that. If anything, as Anthony mentioned, it's going to be one of the 2 positions we're about to discuss next. But yes, do I feel as though we have the starting center on our roster currently? No freaking way. I want to go out and draft somebody to compete right now, because if we don't go and do that, we're hoping to God that somebody just comes out of the woodwork and pans out, which is very unlikely, extremely unlikely, guys. We don't have a center on the roster right now except for Hassenauer out of Alabama a couple years ago, and he's never been a starter in 3 years in the NFL. So I have no faith that he can do that. If he does emerge and becomes the starter, then he worked his ass off and he earned it. Because right now, history does not suggest that. But of course, anybody on the Giants, I'm gunning for them. I'm hoping they raise their level of talent and they rise to the occasion and can make a really, really nice impact here. So hopefully J.C. Hassenauer can do that for us, but that does not mean I'm willing to pass up on a center in this draft to make sure that we can solve that as a long-term solution.
1000%. I mean, J.C. Hassenauer does not prevent me from drafting a center. No doubt. Not a chance does he prevent me from taking one of these top prospects. Again, I really like Luke Weipler. I really like John Michael Schmitz. These are a couple guys that I think the Giants should be targeting, especially if they're on the board with the 57th overall pick. But talking about the 25th overall pick, which way should the Giants go in the upcoming first round of this draft? And in my opinion, it's got to be one of the 2 positions that we're going to discuss. But let's talk about cornerback first, because I think when you look at the cornerback spot, it is a bigger need now than I think a lot of people really put into perspective, because I know that the Giants, have a lot of young talent there. Like they've got Cordell Flott, they've got Aaron Robinson, Dane Belton's a cornerback safety hybrid. They have some players, right? They have some guys who can compete. But overall, they don't really have any bona fide established starters outside of Adoree Jackson. Now, Adoree Jackson's great, but he's on the final year of his contract, so you also have to factor that into this equation. When you're looking at the cornerback spot and you're considering going with one in the first or second round of the 2023 NFL draft, well, you go with them in the first round, you have them for 4 years plus a fifth-year option if they pan out, and that's really important when Adoree Jackson is entering the final year of his deal. The Giants don't only need to draft a starter to play opposite of Adoree Jackson, they need someone who has the potential to one day replace Adoree Jackson. So I think that it's a really nuanced conversation at that position, considering, yes, the Giants have a lot of talent there, but none of it's established and none of it looks ready to go and start a full 17 games. Again, Cordell Flott, a player that I like, he's very skinny, he still has a lot of work to do. Aaron Robinson spent the majority of last season injured. There are a lot of players who I could see projecting into that starting role, but right now I do think that it's worth it to add a premier talent to the cornerback room to continue to compete and hopefully take the job from one of these other guys, or at least motivate them to be even better and take the job from the new incomer. So that's kind of my take on the cornerback position. Another thing that I'll say, I do find it really interesting that the Giants didn't really address the position at all during free agency. They signed one guy, former Duke cornerback, who was undrafted, and they signed him to a 3-year deal. So clearly they have some sort of confidence in him, maybe developing him and getting him to pan out, at least on special teams, or maybe as a cornerback on the starting defense one day. Forgetting his name right now, last name Johnson. But I will say that I find it so interesting that the Giants didn't go into free agency, didn't get a guy like a Marcus Peters or anyone else that was available on free agency. So it really does indicate to me that the Giants are either way more confident in their group of cornerbacks than we are, or they have a plan to go into that draft and find a starter within the first 3 rounds. And in my opinion, I think that's their plan. I think they are planning on taking a cornerback very early in this draft, and I would not be shocked at all to see them take one in the first round. And in fact, Alex, I wouldn't even be shocked to see the Giants trade up to land a premier cornerback in the first round of this year's draft, because there are some guys who could potentially go in the top 10 to 15 picks that are premier cornerbacks, could be day one instant impact starters, and it wouldn't shock me to see the Giants make an aggressive move on the first night of the draft to move up and go ahead and snag a corner. So what are your thoughts on that? I mean, what are your thoughts on the cornerback position in general for the Giants, but also touching on the first round of this year's draft? Do you think there's a chance that the Giants could move up, be aggressive, and try and make a trade up to land one of the top cornerbacks in this class?
I mean, look, anything's possible. They could definitely do that. But you asked me what do I think about the cornerback position. The cornerback position right now is a big liability. Why, you might ask? Because after 2023, we don't have a CB1. Adoree Jackson's contract is over, and if they wanted to restructure his deal and add some more years onto it, they could, and it's still possible they do. And if they do manage to pull that off, it will definitely give us an answer for the long term. But if they don't make that decision, if they are willing to let it kind of just expire naturally and organically, they need to have a backup plan in place. And drafting a top cornerback in this year's draft will give them the time to inject him as the CB2, let him get his feet wet, and naturally assume that CB1 position. That makes the most logical sense. That is a really good strategy. A lot of teams do this, and the Giants would be smart to do that. It's a solid move, and I think that I could totally get behind it. But at the end of the day, of course, you look over at some players we do have on the roster. A lot of people really like Cordell Flott. You know, we like Cordell Flott. We hope he can become that. He's a little bit young. He's a little bit small. He has a lot of injury concerns because of that lack of strength and size. So I don't really want to put all my chips into Cordell Flott right now and see he is a guaranteed starter. If he ends up being that, then I would love it. A lot of people think he can be our slot corner. I don't think that's a good idea. He's too small. Slot cornerbacks need to be really physical in the running game. The guy's going to get broken in half. He's going to be out after 2 games. He's going to take a hit to the shoulder and fracture his clavicle. I guarantee he's not going to be playing in that slot, or if he is, he's going to get hurt. I'm not going to guarantee that, obviously. I hope to God he doesn't. I freaking knock on wood a million times. I want him to be healthy, and I want him to be a great player for us. But I don't think he's big enough, and I don't think he has the stature to hold up physically in the slot. He's much more of a boundary corner, in my opinion. So let him compete. You know what I mean? Let Cordell Flott compete with a CB1 they draft in the first round at 25. You know, if he ends up beating him out, that CB ends up developing, you know, helping along. And if anyone gets injured, they can step in immediately. You know, position battles and making players earn their right to snaps is a good thing. That's what Brian Dable has done on this team. He's not giving out reps. He's making people earn their reps. Look at Kenny Golladay, $17 million, sitting on the bench collecting water bottles. You know what I mean? You see these guys that should be playing, or theoretically on paper should be on the field, and they are not on the field because they're not doing enough to justify it. So, that's not to say that a 25th overall pick shouldn't be immediately starting. You draft someone in the first round to make an impact immediately. But if Cordell Flott ends up kicking ass in camp, who's to say he doesn't steal a job? And it's all up for grabs at the end of the day. Because he is a draft pick from last year in Joe Shane's first draft class with the Giants. So, they're all equal in some way. But I do think that drafting a cornerback would be a really great thing to do just in terms of preparing for post Adoree Jackson. If they are going to let him go, I would say that there's a really good chance. I'd say there's a 50-60% chance they draft a cornerback in the first round, probably more than that. But, that's kind of the way that I'm leaning right now. This is a pretty deep cornerback class. There's some really, really good talent. There's a couple of really good man coverage corners too. You look at some really good guys. What's his name? McDuffie on the Chiefs. He was a rookie and he made some big plays to help them get to the Super Bowl and win the Super Bowl. So you can see these youngsters make an impact. And the Giants have one of the best DB coaches in Jerome Henderson in the NFL. So you look for a young cornerback like that to develop and grow. That's the right place to put him, behind one of the best DB coaches on one of the best coach teams in football, and then eventually assume that CB1 spot that Adoree Jackson leaves behind. Sounds like a good move to me. I'm on board with that. But there is another position here that could mess with our plans a little bit that we're about to discuss, right?
Yes, there is another position that I think the Giants could kind of sideline that conversation around the cornerback position and go ahead and talk about the wide receiver position. That could definitely change the Giants' plans as they get to this 2023 NFL draft. I think it comes down to those two positions that we just mentioned, Alex: wide receiver or corner. And it looks like the Giants are really leaning towards taking a wide receiver in the first round. They've done extensive research on all of these draft prospects. They've met with a lot of them. They've had dinner with a few of them. They're really interested in guys like Jordan Addison, Quentin Johnston, Zay Flowers, all of these players that you could think of, Jackson Smith and Jigba, all of these first-round wide receivers. The Giants have significant interest in drafting one of them. They've made that very obvious, but they've also made it obvious that they're interested in the cornerback spot. Now, I also think that putting the wide receiver position in the top three might be considered to some controversial. Others might say it should be the number one. It's a very interesting way. It's just a very interesting conversation around the wide receiver position for the Giants right now, because I think that everyone knows the Giants are interested in adding an elite wide receiver one, but is it worth adding a guy who's going to be another wide receiver two for you when you already have a few of those guys on the roster? I think that's kind of where the conversation gets interesting, because if the Giants go into that first round planning to draft a player like a Jordan Addison, but if they don't necessarily feel like Jordan Addison is going to be a day one wide receiver one, should they even still draft him, or should they go with a cornerback? I think it's a nuanced conversation. They made some upgrades to their offense. They added Darren Waller. He can give you wide receiver one production from the tight end spot. They also added Paris Campbell, a real low cost, high reward contract on an incentive-laden deal. I really like Paris Campbell and what he provides, but when you look at this wide receiver core, they're missing something, right? They definitely still need that number one receiver who can be your guy on a down-to-down basis, kind of get 10-plus targets per game. And Jordan Addison, maybe he is that guy. Maybe JSN is that guy. Maybe Zay Flowers could be. But if the Giants don't feel like one of those guys is that guy, that wide receiver one, then I think that they should go with a cornerback, and they should get somebody who can start on the outside opposite of Adoree Jackson, because that could legitimately transform their defense for this upcoming season. To have a really good corner opposite of Adoree Jackson, I mean, we all saw the impact that Adoree Jackson had when he went down with an injury, and when he was out of the lineup, that was a real problem for the Giants because everybody was throwing the ball on them. They lost that game against Minnesota in the regular season, and then they had Adoree Jackson back in the postseason, and it was all good. The Giants win their first playoff game in over a decade. Now imagine if they actually had depth at the cornerback spot. We could have won a lot more games, maybe gotten a higher seed for the postseason, maybe been a significantly better team just by having one extra talented cornerback. So that's kind of the question here for you, Alex. Is it more worth it to get that one wide receiver who can give you that elite every down impact, or is it more important for the Giants to find that cornerback depth opposite of Adoree Jackson to kind of transform that defense? It's really, do you want to transform the defense, or do you want to hopefully try and transform the offense? Which way do you lean? How do you prioritize it?
Look, the truth is that the Giants, and I believe this, that Joe Shane is not looking as though this year is the one that we're making the big run. You know what I mean? He's not looking at 2023 as the season where we're pushing for the Super Bowl. If we end up there, it's because we deserved it and we had great coaching and a lot of players elevated their game. But this was never a 2-year rebuild, guys. This was a 3-4 year process to build a dynasty. That's the goal of every general manager. They want to build a dynasty. They want to build long-term success. They don't want it to be short-term. You don't look at the Jets right now. They're about to go and get Aaron Rodgers for 2 years. They have a 2-year window to win a Super Bowl. After that, who knows what happens? Their defense gets shredded by, they have to cut salaries. They have to find another quarterback, just like the Rams, right? The Rams go out, they trade for Von Miller, they get Matthew Stafford, they win a Super Bowl, and then they play like shit the next year, and they lose everybody, and Matthew Stafford's elbow disintegrates, right? It's that's kind of what happens when you go with that short-term window. Maybe you win a Super Bowl, maybe you don't, and maybe you have a really tough time bouncing back after that. The Giants are not looking to just get a 1-year, 2-year window of Super Bowls. We're looking for dynasty level action. We're looking for 10 years of playoff caliber team. And that's what the Bills have done, right? The Bills have built that with a franchise quarterback in Josh Allen and some really good players. And, Von Miller, if he didn't get hurt last year, who knows what happens. You look at these teams that have long-term sustainable success and are in kind of the realm of Super Bowl every year. The Cincinnati Bengals, same exact situation. You get yourself a franchise quarterback like Joe Burrow and Jamar Chase, and you get a decent offensive line and some good defensive pieces. You're in a Super Bowl contending team every single season. That's what the Giants are trying to institute, right? Making a rushed, executing a rush strategy can bounce back and hit you back really hard. So for all the people saying we need a wide receiver one now, we need this now, we need that right now, I guarantee you that's not what they're thinking, right? They're thinking, okay, what is the best way to continue building this team and rounding out weak positions, right? Cornerback is objectively a weak position right now. Adoree Jackson missed time last year. He has 1 year left on his contract. We have no CB1 following this upcoming season. I like Cordell Flott, as I mentioned, but I don't see him as a CB1. I see him as a CB2 maximum. That's what I see his ceiling as, a CB2. We have Aaron Robinson who can't stay healthy. Maybe he goes back into the slot. We have Darnay Holmes still under contract. We don't have that many players. We need cornerback depth. We need guys to be learning how to be great now, so that way we can supplement that position later. The wide receiver unit, yes, we have some talent there, but it's not enough. We still need to address that, and I guarantee you in the first 3 rounds, we're probably gonna add a receiver, probably gonna add a cornerback, and probably gonna add a center. We have Wan'Dale Robinson, who they're really high on. If not for that ACL tear, he would have had a really solid season. They bring back Darius Slayton, really solid player for us and has chemistry. Isaiah Hodgins, an absolute gem we discovered. Of course, you bring back Sterling Shepard. Paris Campbell, one of the most underrated signings of this offseason, in my opinion. He has to have a career year to even hit the baseline incentives in his deal. So I love that contract. And then you got guys like Jamison Crowder, really good value signing for absolutely nothing. Your wide receiver one de facto in Darren Waller, if he's healthy, he's basically producing that level of contributions for you on offense. The Giants did enough on offense to get by this year, but their defense needs support. Linebacker, Bobby Okereke, big signing there. They have to pay some guys like Dexter Lawrence. They need to address cornerback. So is this an offseason where the Giants are going all in to make it to the Super Bowl right now? Absolutely not. We're still laying the foundational pieces. We're still laying the bricks, but that doesn't mean we're not going to try and win now too. So I expect the Giants to be very smart about their picks. I expect them to go for the BPA. I expect them to find some good value selections in the mid rounds. But what ultimately what's going to happen in the first round is they're going to go for the player that plugs a gap for them right now that is the highest on their board. And that ultimately could end up being cornerback. And a lot of people, Anthony's kind of in the same boat as a lot of these analysts, that the wide receiver class this year is not that good. A lot of mid to low end first round picks that could fall into the second. The Giants might be able to even move up a couple spots in the second round and grab themselves a top receiver, one of those top guys on the board, and walk away happy. Maybe they wait until their second round pick is there. They get a Tank Dell. Maybe Jalen Hyatt drops. There's so many things that could happen in this draft class, and we're really close to it. We're hyped about it. We're excited to see how things unfold. But one thing is for sure, the Giants are about to get better.
1000%. And I have a lot of confidence and faith placed into this regime. I think that Joe Shane, he knows what he's doing. And I think after 1 year, 2 years now, 2 off seasons that he's had, of course, we'll see what the product looks like on the football field this upcoming September and so on. But when you look at what he did last offseason to put the Giants in position to make an improbable playoff run, win their first playoff game in over a decade, and everything that the Giants are building right now, I do feel really confident, Alex, and I agree with you that yes, by the end of this month, the Giants will be a better football team. I don't think this is like the days of the past with Gettleman and Reese, where a lot of those mid-round picks just turned into a graveyard. I think that Joe Schoen has proven during his time in Buffalo and even with the Giants that he's able to find mid-round guys who can make an impact pretty quickly and be long-term starters on NFL teams. I think that Daniel Bellinger is a great example of that. Now, I know the Giants just they traded for Darren Waller, so now Bellinger's our tight end too, but the impact that kid made as a rookie was tremendous, and I do see the potential there for the Giants to run a lot more two tight end sets and have both of those players really establish themselves as stars in this offense. Honestly, I do see kind of star potential there for Daniel Bellinger, and I think a lot of these mid-round picks that the Giants made were solid this past season and definitely have potential, like Joshua Zito, like Cordell Fly. These are guys who can eventually be starters. So you ask me, am I confident in the Giants getting better by the end of the month? 100%. I am confident in Brian Dable. I am confident in Joe Schoen, and taking a look at some of these top positions of weaknesses for the Giants, there's a lot of guys that make perfect sense for them at both the center position, the wide receiver position, and of course the cornerback position. And I'm excited to see just which way the Giants decide to go with those positions and with their draft picks at this upcoming draft. And of course, we're going to continue to keep you all updated right here on Fireside Giants. So make sure to subscribe to the channel if you are new. Ring the bell so you don't miss an episode. Leave a like if you enjoyed this episode and comment your thoughts on the Giants' biggest needs down below in the comment section. Again, make sure to leave 5-star review on Apple and Spotify if you're listening there. We will catch you all in the next one. Have a good one, and let's go Giants.
TVSO.